Have you ever wondered how many things we accept in life that, deep down, we shouldn't? We often carry weights, expectations, and opinions that are not even ours. Sometimes we carry the weight of other people's expectations, opinions, and judgments as if they were our own, until they become a burden that is difficult to recognize, let alone free from. But what if, for a moment, we could see what's really worth carrying? If there was a way to separate what is ours from what others impose? That's what we're going to explore now, and believe me, staying until the end can completely change your view of yourself and what you accept in your life. Throughout this video, you will learn about Clara's story, a young woman who, over the years, learned to please everyone around her to secure her place, even if it meant giving up her desires and values. Clara represents many of our stories, those in which we abandon parts of ourselves in favor of an acceptance that doesn't always make sense. Stay until the end, where we'll reveal Clara's greatest discovery, which might be exactly what you need to hear. And if you like stories that make you think, subscribe and like so we can continue creating content like this. Clara was seen by everyone as a kind person, one of those who would go out of their way to help anyone, always with a smile on her face. Since she was a child, she had learned that being good and understanding was the way to win the affection of others. But as she grew, something began to change within her. Every time he gave up what he wanted or stopped expressing his opinions, he felt uneasy. It was as if something was being lost, a part of herself that was falling apart with each concession. Somewhere deep down, Clara began to question, why do I accept so much of what bothers me? It was then that she began to reflect on specific moments, small daily concessions that she made without thinking. From changing her plans to please her friends to accepting the disdain of co-workers, Clara noticed that she always put the well-being of others above her own. But the cost of this was high. She felt constantly exhausted and increasingly distant from her true essence. How many times had she done something just to avoid conflict or be well thought of? This simple realization opened an internal door for Clara. Something needed to change, but she still didn't know what. That night, as he lay down, a phrase echoed in his mind. "What is unacceptable to me?" And as she repeated those words, Clara realized that she didn't even know the answer. There were so many times when she had shaped her desires to correspond to others that she ended up disconnecting from herself. Determined, she promised herself that she would find answers. But she knew that this would be a difficult journey, where she would face not only the impositions of others, but mainly what she herself had allowed for so many years. One day, Clara went to the supermarket and was choosing some vegetables and fruits to prepare a special dinner. Suddenly, an older woman who was just behind in line looked at her choices and commented with a forced smile, "Honey, don't you think that so much fiber could be bad for you?" For a moment, Clara froze. The comment was unnecessary and even intrusive, but she smiled politely and nodded, as she always did. On the way back home, he wondered why, in situations like this, she always remained silent, swallowed her words, and let other people's judgment invade her mind. It reminded her of other times when she had accepted unsolicited opinions without question. From advice about her personal life to advice about her professional choices, Clara had become an easy target for criticism disguised as suggestions. But these little intrusions went beyond mere opinions. Over time, they began to affect the way she saw herself, and most importantly, how she made her own decisions. Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius said, "We should ignore opinions that don't resonate with our own values." But Clara realized she had never done that. "I always assimilated everything I heard, even if it didn't make sense." This realization brought a new question. What were these opinions, often negative, planting in your mind? Over time, Clara realized that each opinion she absorbed was like a weed in her mental garden, undermining her self-confidence and creating a distorted image of who she really was. She decided it was time to cultivate an internal filter where only what was true for her would get through. And for that, you would need a new type of courage, that of not absorbing what doesn't make sense and starting to define what really was yours. Growing up in a traditional family, Clara was always told to be someone respectful and follow the safe path. His life seemed to have been mapped out from the beginning: a good job, financial stability, marriage and children. But as the years passed, Clara felt increasingly trapped in a script that seemed written by others. Deep down, she dreamed of exploring the world, discovering new cultures, and perhaps working with art. However, these dreams were buried by family expectations that she accepted without question. Clara experienced conflict between her most intimate desires and what society seemed to demand. When observing friends and acquaintances, Clara noticed that she was not alone in this feeling. Many of them followed paths that did not resonate with their desires, just to meet external expectations. And that's when she realized living for others is missing the opportunity to write your own story. A story, after all, is made up of true choices, and each decision that didn't come from her was a trait that she didn't recognize in her own life picture. How could she be happy following a path that didn't reflect who she really was? Deciding to take control of her life, Clara began to question these standards and, little by little, allowed herself to dream again. He remembered stories of people who defied expectations and left powerful marks on the world. People like Albert Einstein, who ignored what others thought and followed their own path. Clara understood that, like these great names, she would need courage to reject what did not represent her. But she knew that this was the only way to create a genuine life, one that truly had value for her. As Clara reflected on the expectations she had always accepted, she began to feel the weight of what it meant to live for others. Every choice she made, not out of her own desire, but to please or correspond to what others expected, was like a piece that she herself removed from her essence. The result was a growing emptiness and a feeling of disconnection, as if her life was being lived in third person, where she watched but did not participate. He felt like a character in a movie, but without his own script, wandering without direction. These feelings of detachment were nothing new, but Clara had never paid attention to them. Until then, I thought it was normal to feel confused or dissatisfied, as if complete happiness was just an illusion. But now he understood that every decision made by others left a mark. It was as if, by living for the desires of others, he was nullifying his own identity. This wasn't just frustrating, it was painful. Discovering that she had accepted a life that was not hers brought new pain, but at the same time it motivated her to rebuild everything from scratch. Clara then realized that she could only live a fulfilling life if she was truly authentic. He began to chart new paths, even if it meant disappointing some along the way. Deep down, I felt like I would never be able to please everyone, and the sooner I accepted that, the closer I would be to being who I really wanted to be. The journey that Clara chose now was to rediscover herself and start living based on her own choices, and no longer in the shadow of other people's expectations. One day, Clara received an unexpected call from a friend she hadn't seen for a while. The friend invited her to an event, but made it clear that she would need a favor from her to help organize everything. Although hesitant, Clara accepted, wanting to maintain the friendship and be seen as someone trustworthy. However, as she became more involved, she realized that the favor came with a weight. Her friend expected Clara to be available at any time without caring about her personal commitments. Clara realized that this pattern was recurring in her life. Often to be accepted, she said yes to favors that left her overwhelmed and that in return brought only tiredness and at times resentment. He questioned himself about the true value of the favors he accepted and understood that deep down he was afraid of appearing selfish. However, upon reflecting on the situation, he concluded that a favor should not come with an emotional price, but with mutual generosity. Having decided, Clara talked to her friend, explaining that she would help as much as she could. The reaction was one of surprise and even some disappointment, but for the first time, Clara felt relieved to establish a limit. She understood that she didn't need to accept everything to be loved. This was a milestone in her life, where she began to view favors with caution, discerning between those that were worth it and those that just took away her time and energy. After this experience, Clara began to reflect on the psychology behind favors. He realized that some favors came with ulterior motives, carrying a hidden emotional charge. Some friends and family used these favors as a form of manipulation, hoping that Clara would feel indebted. These interactions made her feel guilty or even pressured to reciprocate, without realizing the impact this had on her mental well-being. Researching, Clara discovered a psychological concept, compulsive reciprocity, where the person feels that they must return the favor, even if the price is too high. This behavior was frequent in her life and made her feel like she was in a constant, unequal exchange. Clara realized that by allowing these favors, she was giving up her freedom of choice. It was as if each yes left her more trapped in emotional obligations that undermined her peace. Inspired by Stoic wisdom, Clara decided it was time to differentiate between genuine favors and those that came with hidden intentions. She started to establish criteria and, above all, listen to her intuition. After all, true friends and family don't need favors to maintain a bond. They exist for the simple pleasure of company and affection, without disguised expectations. Clara began to see her mind as a garden, where each thought and emotion was a seed. Some of these seeds sprouted like beautiful flowers, bringing peace and joy, while others grew like weeds, draining your energy and clouding your vision. She realized that for too long she had let others plant whatever they wanted in her mental garden, without filter or discernment. To restore the health of this garden, Clara began to evaluate every thought and opinion she accepted. She now understood that, like a careful gardener, she needed to remove the weeds that did not serve her growth. This required courage, as it meant letting go of many ideas that she had absorbed over the years without question. When he began to practice this mental screening, he noticed that his internal peace grew and that he was, little by little, rediscovering his essence. Over time, Clara learned that the strength of her mental garden depended on her ability to say no to everything that was destructive or unnecessary. This didn't mean ignoring the world around him, but carefully choosing what he allowed to flourish in his mind. Every no was a yes to her own peace and freedom, and Clara felt that she was finally in harmony with her own thoughts. With her mental garden growing stronger, Clara began to notice how some people carried a cloud of constant negativity. Friends who always saw the bad side of things, family members who insisted on remembering failures, and even co-workers who complained about everything without ever looking for a solution. These dark clouds drained Clara of her peace and often caused her to absorb this emotional burden. While researching this, Clara discovered the concept of emotional contagion, where one person's emotions can affect another. Studies have shown that negativity can rewire the brain, making it more prone to pessimistic emotions. This impact was deeper than she imagined. Clara realized that when she lived intensely with negative people, she ended up mirroring this behavior, absorbing a dark worldview full of limits. Determined to protect her well-being, Clara established clear limits to these interactions. It wasn't about ignoring or pushing people away. It was about protecting your own energy. Every conversation, every negative interaction needed to be filtered so that your mental garden would not be contaminated again. Clara realized that this choice was, in fact, an act of self-love, a way of protecting what was most precious, her inner peace. Upon reflecting on the constant negativity around her, Clara decided to delve even deeper into the psychological effects of this type of energy. It found that, scientifically, frequent negative emotions activate stress responses in the body, affecting both the brain and the heart. This emotional burden wears down the nervous system, reducing the ability to adapt and respond to new challenges. In other words, negativity can literally imprison the mind, preventing it from seeing new possibilities. Clara realized that many of her own anxieties came from the negative interactions she let invade her mind. These emotions, often injected by others, increased their anxiety levels, bringing to the surface fears that didn't always make sense. Thus, she understood that protecting her mind and heart from negativity was not just an emotional issue, but a physical necessity for her well-being. Inspired, Clara began to look more closely at the effects of negativity on her body. When she felt heavy or sad, she analyzed her recent interactions and almost always found an external root. Understanding this, Clara committed to being more selective in relation to the conversations and environments she frequented. This choice was liberating because by protecting your mind, you were building a fortress of peace and sanity. Clara always looked for references to help her follow this new path. It was then that he discovered Stoic philosophy, which taught how to maintain serenity in the midst of chaos. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic thinkers, said, "Choose not to be harmed, and you will not be harmed." Clara found strength in these words, understanding that she could choose how to respond to challenges while maintaining her unshakable peace. The Stoic idea was simple but powerful. We cannot control others, but we can control our reactions. This revelation was transformative for Clara, who until then absorbed everything around her as if she had the duty to carry the pain of the world. Now, she knew she could observe the storms outside without letting these clouds invade her own sky. This choice not to be shaken brought a new sense of lightness to his life. Determined to apply this wisdom in her daily life, Clara began to cultivate a daily practice of self-reflection, where she reviewed her thoughts and emotions. She realized that when she redirected her attention to what really mattered, peace became her natural state. This was the secret of the Stoics, which Clara now adopted as a guide on her journey to a fuller life, less affected by the turbulence of others. By understanding the influence of others on her life, Clara realized that many of the expectations of happiness she carried were not truly hers. From an early age, he heard that he should seek stability, build a family, and reach certain milestones of success to be happy. But as she explored what really made her happy, she discovered that those goals didn't resonate with her true self. It was as if he was chasing borrowed dreams without ever questioning whether those dreams were, in fact, his own. Clara then began to question herself. What would really bring happiness to her life? She realized that many of her deep desires were simple and even clashed with what society expected of her. Instead of status or material achievements, what Clara really wanted was the freedom to explore her passions and the tranquility of living without external pressures. This was a moment of great revelation, as she understood that she could be happy in an authentic way, without following established standards. From then on, Clara decided that she would create her own parameters of happiness. Each choice would go through an internal filter where one would ask, does this bring me closer or further from my essence? This reflection became a constant practice, and she felt how her life changed for the better as she freed herself from the weight of other people's expectations, building happiness that was truly her own. In her search for an authentic life, Clara realized how much she depended on external validation to feel good about herself. It was as if every like on social media, every compliment or word of approval was a small dose of self-esteem. But this dependence came at a price. Whenever approval was lacking, his security crumbled. Clara realized that she was living in a dangerous cycle where her happiness was controlled by factors that she could not control. This discovery was disconcerting. Clara had never realized how this search for external validation kept her trapped in a kind of emotional prison. With each attempt to please or impress, she moved away from her true essence. This realization made her understand that building solid self-esteem would be essential for her peace. He remembered a phrase from Epictetus: "Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but for them to happen as they should." Determined to free herself from this dependence, Clara began to practice self-reflection. Instead of looking for value outside of herself, she began to focus on the qualities that really mattered to her. He celebrated small achievements and recognized his own efforts. This practice was like an anchor in his life, bringing him a peace he had never experienced. Now Clara knew that the most important validation was her own. Clara realized that, in many moments of her life, she had acted according to what she thought others wanted from her. It was as if her life were a stage where she performed for an invisible audience, always waiting for applause. This behavior, although unconscious, kept her in an incessant search for approval. But the more she tried to please, the more anxious and worn out she felt, as this approval was never lasting. Every day, Clara understood that the cost of this search was too high. Every time she acted to be approved, she abandoned a piece of herself. He felt it was time to leave this stage and live for himself without waiting for other people's approval. I knew the path would be difficult, as freeing yourself from deep-rooted patterns requires patience and persistence. But Clara was determined. She wanted to build a life where she was her own audience, where the only expectations that mattered were her own. Over time, Clara learned to reconnect with what really made her happy without expecting anything in return. Each achievement, each small step taken, was a silent victory that brought her closer to her essence. The search for approval was left behind, replaced by a self-acceptance that strengthened her day after day. For Clara, Stoic philosophies became a constant support. She discovered that the secret to solid self-esteem was being clear about who she was and what she really wanted. Epictetus taught that our inner peace should not depend on external factors, but on how we perceive ourselves. Clara deeply identified with this philosophy, feeling that she had finally found a solid foundation on which to build her own worth. Every day, Clara dedicated herself to building unshakable self-esteem based on her own principles. Stoic reflection helped her cultivate a confidence that needed no reassurance. This meant knowing that regardless of what the world thought, she had intrinsic value, something that no one could take away from her. This discovery was like an awakening for Clara, as she now knew that she could be free from external opinions and judgments. With more solid self-esteem, Clara felt strengthened to face the challenges that would come. She learned that true strength came from within, and that the more she connected with her essence, the more prepared she was for whatever life presented to her. Stoic philosophy had become her guide, and through it, Clara found the true meaning of emotional freedom. Through her reflections, Clara noticed the devastating impact of comparisons on her life. Whenever she compared herself to others, she felt like something was missing in herself. Instead of recognizing his own achievements, he looked at what others had, feeding a feeling of insufficiency. This constant comparison undermined her self-esteem and became a trap that kept her always dissatisfied. Clara realized that to live fully, she would have to abandon these unfair comparisons. He remembered an interview with Lady Gaga, in which the singer admitted her struggle with insecurity caused by comparisons. This story inspired her as she realized that even those we admire can suffer from the same pitfalls. By deciding to stop comparing herself, Clara felt that she was regaining the identity she had lost over time. Every time the impulse to compare herself arose, Clara redirected it towards her own achievements. Over time, she discovered that it was possible to be grateful for other people's success without devaluing her own. He learned that the only path to true growth was to focus on his own progress, building a life based on his own achievements. Clara found inspiration in an interview with Lady Gaga, where the artist revealed her own struggles with comparison. Lady Gaga admitted that, even at the height of her success, she constantly felt insecure comparing herself to other women in the industry. For Clara, this revelation was a turning point, as it showed that even people who seemed to have it all face the same internal challenges. It was a relief to know that she wasn't alone in her insecurities. From this example, Clara began to understand that comparison led nowhere, except to a cycle of dissatisfaction and disappointment. Lady Gaga inspired her to focus on what she could uniquely offer the world that no one else could. Deciding to live without these ties, Clara began to realize that by abandoning comparisons, she found a peace that until then seemed impossible. She then decided to focus on cultivating her own skills and interests. Over time, Clara felt stronger and less influenced by other people's standards. Each small victory on her own path was a reminder that success was relative and that the only important measure was how far she progressed in relation to herself. Inspired by the lessons of the Stoics, Clara began to redefine what success meant to her. Instead of following common definitions of fame, wealth, or social validation, she began to see success as the ability to live according to your own values and find peace in every choice. Epictetus said that true happiness is not needing anything but yourself, and this touched Clara deeply. Clara realized that success did not need to be measured based on what others saw, but rather by her peace of mind. He began to set goals that had personal meaning, such as learning something new, practicing kindness, and being present in important moments in life. For Clara, success now meant being true to herself and the small joys that enriched her journey. This reset brought her relief, as it allowed her to release the pressure that had previously been crushing her. It was no longer necessary to match external standards. From that moment on, success was redefined as a reflection of her self-knowledge and her ability to love herself, regardless of the opinions of others. Throughout her journey, Clara has come across unsolicited advice countless times. They came from all directions, from family, friends, and even strangers. While many were well-intentioned, others carried a hidden burden of judgment and expectations. Over time, she noticed that this advice influenced her decisions, leading her to choices that deep down were not in line with her true desires. This advice was like unwanted visitors to his mind, disorganizing his thoughts and undermining his self-confidence. Clara felt the need to protect her mind from these invasive advice. After all, no one knew her struggles, her dreams, and her limitations as well as she did. It was time to learn to distinguish between external voices and your own inner voice. With this new perspective, Clara began to politely thank her for the advice she received, but stopped following it blindly. She learned to select what really made sense to her and discard what was just noise. This emotional sorting process strengthened her independence, and she finally began to fully trust her own decisions. Clara realized that by absorbing the opinions of others without question, her mind was constantly saturated. It was as if each opinion was a pebble thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples and ripples until there was nothing left of its own balance. These other people's judgments, although harmless at first sight, little by little transformed her perception of herself and her choices. This invasion of external thoughts caused Clara to lose touch with what really moved her. How many times had she changed her mind or given up on something important just for fear of criticism? Upon noticing this pattern, Clara decided it was time to shield her mind. It was like building a wall around your mental garden where only what truly mattered would have access. Determined to keep her mind at peace, Clara began to cultivate an inner silence, carefully filtering what she let in. This silence became a powerful way of preserving her energy and authenticity, and the sense of calm it brought was a sign that she was finally on the right path. Marcus Aurelius said that our mind is a fortress, and that we must be the guardians of those we allow to enter. This philosophy made Clara understand that by rejecting what did not serve her, she was not being rude, but protecting her emotional space. Wisely rejecting became a self-care practice, where she actively chose what deserved and didn't deserve her attention. At first, Clara felt uncomfortable saying no to people close to her, but she soon realized how necessary it was. The act of rejecting was not disrespectful to others, but a show of respect for herself. Over time, she learned that every time she said no to something that hurt her, she was saying yes to something that really mattered: her peace. Thus, rejecting became an exercise of freedom. Each no gave her back power over her life and reminded her that she didn't have to accept what drained her. Clara felt that the more she practiced this art, the more she found clarity and peace in her choices, embracing the freedom to live in harmony with her own values. Clara, like many of us, had already been seduced by promises of quick solutions to complex problems. The idea of solving deep issues with instant formulas seemed tempting, but the reality was always disappointing. Every shortcut she took only increased her exhaustion, leading her to a cycle of endless frustration. By exploring Stoic philosophy, Clara learned that true achievement takes time and patience. Epictetus said that no great feat is achieved suddenly. For Clara, this was a valuable lesson, as it made her see that the path to self-knowledge could not be rushed. With each step she took, she got closer to her essence, and each moment of reflection was a victory. By abandoning quick fixes, Clara found a pace that respected her own journey. There was no more rushing, just a daily commitment to genuine growth. This patience was liberating, as it allowed him to abandon the anxiety of immediate results and embrace the transformation process as a constant learning process. The Stoics believed that true success lies in overcoming difficulties with resilience and determination. Clara incorporated this vision into her life, understanding that there were no shortcuts to true transformation. Every challenge she faced was an opportunity to learn and grow, and every obstacle was a stepping stone toward a stronger version of herself. Clara began to see success as a solid construction where each experience, good or bad, added something to its foundation. She realized that by avoiding shortcuts, she was strengthening her ability to face any adversity that came her way. Resilience became her greatest ally, and Clara found a strength she never imagined she had before. Life then became a learning field, where it could grow without haste, trusting in its own process. Each victory was genuine, built with effort and dedication, and this brought Clara a satisfaction that no quick solution could offer. Clara found that to truly transform, she would need persistence. In the past, he used to give up the first sign of difficulty, but now he saw every obstacle as a chance to expand his limits. Persistence became the key to opening doors she never imagined could cross. This commitment to real growth required sacrifices, but it also brought incomparable rewards. Each day, Clara felt stronger and confident because she knew she was building something lasting. Stoicism taught her that true progress does not come effortlessly, but it is precisely this dedication that makes each achievement have value. Clara learned that the path of self-knowledge was not linear, but it was worth it. Persistence gave him the resilience necessary to continue, and every little victory remembered her that she was getting closer to her best version. On his journey of self-knowledge, Clara noted that he carried many blame that were not really hers. He always felt responsible for the feelings and problems of others, assuming a burden that worn it deeply. This tendency to absorb the guilt of others made her exhausted and, in many cases, emotionally fragile. It was as if she were constantly apologizing, even without being guilty. Clara realized that this guilt was a form of control that people unconsciously exerted on her. Carrying alien guilt was a prison, and Clara realized that to be free would need to set limits. Inspired by the Stoic, she understood that she could not control the expectations of others, but could decide what she would accept to carry. Her peace of mind was at stake, and she decided that she would only accept guilt that they were really yours. Determined to break free, Clara began to observe when these feelings of guilt arose and question her validity. Over time, he learned to differentiate between his responsibility and the emotions of others. As he detached from these faults, he felt lighter and owner of herself. This was an essential step for your emotional autonomy. Clara realized that to protect herself from the guilt, she would need to set clear limits on her relationships. At first, he feared that this attitude was misunderstood, but soon realized it was necessary. Each established limit was a way of respecting itself, of honoring their own emotional well-being. Clara understood that self-care was not selfishness, but a way to protect his mental health. Determined to implement these limits, Clara began to communicate assertively when something did not please her. He learned to say no without guilt, understanding that his peace of mind was more important than meeting the expectations of others. At first, the reactions were varied, but Clara realized that those who really cared about her understood and respected her limits. Over time, setting limits became a natural practice that made her more peaceful and safe. Clara learned that her value was not pleasing everyone, but in respecting her own essence. This new behavior brought a feeling of freedom, and she felt that she finally began to live according to her own rules. Inspired by Stoic teachings, Clara began to see emotional self-defense as a fundamental practice. Stoics believed that serenity comes from knowing how to control our reactions and not allow external chaos to invade our internal peace. Clara decided to adopt this philosophy as a strategy for dealing with challenging situations, especially those that tested their emotional limits. Now, whenever someone tried to impose on her negative opinions or emotions, Clara remembered that she had the power of choice. She was the one who decided what she allowed in her mental space, and this simple act of self-awareness brought her a new confidence. He realized that by taking control of his reactions, he strengthened internally and became less vulnerable to external influences. This practice of emotional self-defense helped her build an internal fortress where only thoughts and feelings they served could come in. Clara realized that true freedom was in protecting her mind and heart, and that gave her a strength that no one could shake. Over time, she became her own guardian, ensuring that nothing was disturbed her peace. Clara has always felt the pressure of family expectations in her life. Her family believed she should follow a traditional path, seeking stability and safety. However, the more he tried to meet these expectations, the more distant he felt of his own essence. It was as if each choice were a concession of his personal freedom. With each step taken in the direction imposed by the family, Clara felt that she was moving away from who she really was. It was then that he realized that he could never satisfy everyone because the expectations of others would never have an end. She would have to choose between living a life that belonged to her or following a script that did not resonate with her true desires. Determined to be faithful to herself, Clara had sincere conversations with her family, explaining her choices and reaffirming her priorities. Although she faced resistance, She knew this was the only way to honor her own way. Clara finally felt that she was tracing her own story, regardless of family expectations. Clara reflected on how social pressures also shaped their choices. It was as if society had a color palette, where each color represented a path that everyone should follow. But Clara didn't want to paint her picture with the same colors as everyone. She wanted to explore unique tones that reflected her experiences and dreams. This perception led her to question the impact of social norms on her life. How could you live authentically if you always tried to fit in with predefined patterns? Clara understood that to create a genuine life, she would need to dare to challenge these standards and explore her own color palette, even if it meant standing out from the others. With this new vision, Clara began to ignore the conventions that did not align with her values. With each choice made by his own will, she felt that her lifetime became more colorful and authentic. This was his true masterpiece, an expression of everything she was and could be, without the limitations imposed by society. Stoic philosophy taught clearly to cultivate a self-esteem based on its values and not on the opinions of others. She understood that true confidence comes from knowing herself and being at peace with her choices, regardless of external validations. Marco Aurelio, his new philosophical guide, said that the mind is the source of all good, and Clara was inspired by this vision to strengthen his self-esteem. This practice of introspection has become a pillar in your life. Instead of seeking recognition in others, Clara began to focus on her own evolution and to celebrate her achievements, however small. This change brought a serenity she had never experienced before. In building this solid base, Clara found that her self-esteem depended on anything external. Now, even in the midst of criticism or challenges, she knew her value was unshakable. That was the power of true self-esteem, and Clara was finally complete. Clara noted that living for others drifted her from herself. It was as if, when it is overwhelmed by the desires of others, it neglected its own needs and desires. With each concession made, it felt farther from its essence and more vulnerable to emotional wear. This behavior led Clara to realize that the only way to preserve himself was to live in tune with his own wills. With each choice, she had to remember that her happiness and well-being were equally important. This was a difficult step, as it involved setting aside the fear of displeasing and instead prioritizing your own peace. Over time, Clara felt that by placing herself first, she was actually valuing the relationship with herself. He learned that taking care of himself was the first step in building true and lasting relationships. And that's how she found the harmony she sought so much. Accepting everything without questioning was one of the biggest mistakes Clara made. Over time, he realized that the excess of yes wore her and took the focus off what really mattered. It was then that he decided that he would learn to say no to everything that did not resonate with his values and his desires. This new practice of rejecting what was not serving her brought her a sense of control she had never experienced. Each no was a statement that his peace and time had value and that it would not need to be justified. Saying no was not a weakness, but a force that was now part of its essence. Over time, Clara understood that saying no was often a door to large yes in her life, rejecting what was not being focused on what really had value. So she continued her journey of self-discovery, guided by the certainty that she was on the right track. By learning to say no, Clara had to deal with feelings of guilt that arose. She felt bad for refusing requests, fearing being seen as selfish. But over time, he understood that it was a reflection of the expectations imposed by others and not a genuine responsibility. Inspired by Stoicism, Clara practiced the acceptance that she did not need to please everyone. This helped her break free from guilt and to live lighter. To Clara, refusing without remorse has become a practice of freedom. Clara found that in order to preserve her mental peace, she would need to learn to reject wisely what she did not contribute to her well-being. This practice of conscious rejection was not easy, as it always feared disappointing others. However, he realized that by saying no clearly and kindly, he was not only protecting his mind, but also respecting his own limits. The wise rejection became a form of self-care, where Clara defined what deserved her energy and attention. Each non-said no was an act of respect for herself, and she understood that she was not being rude, but assertive. This helped her emotionally strengthen and maintain her inner peace. Over time, Clara felt that her mind was lighter and more organized. Rejecting wisely was like taking care of a garden where she selected carefully what allowed to grow. This practice of rejection was liberating, and Clara felt more and more in control of her choices and peace. Throughout his journey, Clara realized that the incessant search for approval was a burden that carried early. This need to be accepted and appreciated made her act according to what others expected, not what she really wanted. But this obsession with approval made her anxious, insecure, and always in search of external validation. Determined to break with this cycle, Clara began to wonder why she needed so much the approval of others. He found that this paranoia for acceptance was a reflection of his insecurities, and that only she herself could break free from that weight. Clara understood that the only really necessary approval was hers, and that being faithful to herself was the greatest act of courage she could practice. From then on, Clara focused on her own achievements, celebrating each step toward what she believed. The search for approval of others has lost its importance, and she discovered an internal freedom that she had never experienced before. Now, the opinion that really mattered was yours. And that was all I needed to live in peace. Clara realized how contemporary society exerts constant pressure so that everyone reaches high success patterns. Success was measured in terms of status, material goods, and social recognition. This pressure made her wonder if she was really on the right track, because she always saw her comparing her achievements with those of others. In reflecting on these standards, Clara realized that the concept of success that society promoted did not resonate with its true values. Instead of seeking the approval of others, I wanted to build a life aligned with its own beliefs and passions. This was a bold decision, but Clara felt it was the only way to find true achievement. Determined to live in his own terms, Clara redefined success as internal peace and freedom to be herself. This change of perspective freed her from social pressures and allowed him to focus on what really mattered. With this new vision, Clara began to live each day with authenticity, valuing every little victory on her own journey. Clara began to visualize her mind like a castle where only what was really important could enter. Every thought, every emotion, and each opinion needed to go through its inner gate. This mindset helped her develop a protective barrier against negative influences and keep her mind alone. The idea of treating your mind as a castle brought Clara a new understanding of self-care. She realized that when protecting her mental space, she was carefully choosing the influences she allowed in her life. This practice did not mean closing to the world, but being selective about what was really worth it. This mental castle became his fortress of peace and resilience. Clara felt that by establishing these limits, her mind was strengthened and she was more clear to make decisions aligned with her values. It was a sense of freedom and protection, where she was the guardian of her own well-being. Clara found in Stoic teachings the inspiration to strengthen not only your mind, but also your heart. The wisdom stoically taught it that we should choose our battles, and that not everything deserves our attention or energy. This view brought him a new sense of serenity, for he realized that he could maintain his peace even in the midst of difficult situations. Applying these teachings to her life, Clara focused on what really mattered, avoiding unnecessary concerns and negative emotions. This stoic approach helped her preserve her peace and protect her heart from external influences that before destabilized her. Now she understood that true power was in her ability to remain serene. With his heart and mind aligned, Clara felt that she was able to face any challenge. Stoics taught him that true freedom comes from our ability to rule ourselves, and this learning made it stronger and more centered. This philosophy was now part of his life, protecting his internal balance. Clara began to reflect on the concept of freedom and what she really meant to live for himself. He realized that he had been a prisoner of the expectations of others for a long time, and that to be free, he would need to break with these invisible currents. This freedom was an act of self-love, a conscious choice to honor their own desires. In deciding to live for herself, Clara experienced a sense of relief. Every choice he made now was based on his true self, and it brought him a joy that had never felt. To live for yourself was to allow yourself to make mistakes, explore and learn, without the need for external validation. It was, finally, the freedom he always wanted. This change was transformative, and Clara began to see her life as a unique adventure. The freedom to be herself was the greatest gift she could give, and she knew that from then on her journey would be guided by her own inner compass. Clara understood that to live a full life, she would need to build her way around what really mattered to her. This decision led her to simplify her life, eliminating what was superfluous and focusing on what made her happy. Each choice was now an expression of its values, and this brought him a peace he always sought. She began to invest her time in activities and relationships that strengthened her, leaving aside commitments that added nothing. This restructuring of priorities brought him a new vision of fullness. Clara realized that she didn't need much to be happy, just authenticity and the courage to live according to her own values. With a life more aligned with his essence, Clara felt that she finally found meaning every day. That was the secret of fullness, living with intention, surrounded by what really mattered, and leaving what was useless behind. This new life was the reflection of its transformation, an authentic and true journey. Clara ended her journey with the understanding that her mental garden needed constant care. Every thought, every emotion, and every experience was a seed, and only those that contributed to their peace should be cultivated. This practice of mental strengthening was a way of honoring all the way that had traveled. Daily, Clara was dedicated to taking care of this mental garden, removing weeds from negative influences and cultivating positive and constructive thoughts. This practice of mental gardening was a ritual of self-pity, a way to keep your mind healthy and serene. Now Clara understood that her peace was the most precious good and would do everything to protect her. By strengthening his mental garden, Clara reached the peace she sought so much. I knew there would always be challenges, but now I was prepared to deal with them with serenity and confidence. This was the end of a journey and the beginning of a new life, where Clara would be forever the gardener of her own peace.